specifically said I wanted to talk about this one because a lot of you will work with others in HR. Unless this particular topic comes up, then you basically, for the most part, have been getting me for it because these are sticky situations. And one of the things that we've really also tried to develop is a practice, a regular practice for addressing performance problems, disciplinary problems. I'd like to say it doesn't happen very often, but sadly it does because things happen. So this whole session is really to prep you and give you guidance, and you're going to hear me and Rachel and Sean, if they want to chime in, say over and over and over to get HR involved. And it's not because we have to control the situation. It's just that there are a lot of requirements. And so, and they can get legal very, very quickly because we have different laws, but we also have collective bargaining agreements that we have to follow. And so I don't know, I'm not necessarily gonna walk through every single thing, but I am gonna pull up the document that Rachel provided. You may not have had time to read it. It's a little, it's long because like I said, there's a lot of stuff to it. But there are some things that, we've been trying to shore up supervisors over time. And now, but we also, at the same time, we're trying to build up our own internal HR practices because we were inconsistent around how we addressed, different issues around progressive discipline or due process. So it's taken us a little while, and I feel like we're pretty secure now with what we need to do. Hopefully, we do want folks to feel like they have a resource to go to. One of the things that I want to point out that is very important is when you're starting to feel like there's a challenge with an employee, as a supervisor with an employee, or if you have two employees that are struggling, ask for help. All of you are brilliant people, but it can go sideways pretty quickly because I will tell you, and all the time I've been doing this, there are no two that have been exactly the same because people are different, circumstances are different. And but here's the one thing that I hear, that I ask all the time, and is when someone brings something to me, supervisor, and says, or to us at HR, and says, hey, so-and-so's having a challenge. This will be my first question. Have you identified that in their evaluation? And I will tell you, it is less than probably 3% of times that people have actually identified that problem that's been going on for years in an evaluation. So one of the things you're going to hear today is you have to document it. We also get I'm just sick of it. I've talked to them a bunch of times. They haven't done this. They've done that. Now they have new issues. I want them gone. Here's what we're going to do is say, go back to step one, which you didn't document. It's not in their evaluation. We have no basis to say you've even talked to them. So you've got to go all the way back and start documenting, right? So it's really important that when you start having conversations with an employee, even if they seem relatively benign, that you just follow up with an email, right? Hey, could you show up to work on time?
So Laura,
if you're doing your check-ins, go ahead.
If this is an event that's happened since you've done the evaluation, so there wasn't really the opportunity to put in the evaluation, what is the recommended time frame for getting those documented conversations?
Good. So I would say, so we'll go through the steps of progressive discipline. I'll say them here really quickly. Verbal is the first place you start. Telling them what the situation is or the challenge or whatever it is you're trying to say. Please make sure it is an open conversation because maybe you don't have all the facts, right? Like, here's my observation. When you have things you want to share, it should be observational, right? Or someone has reported something that you can point to, but once you do that, you start with verbal, and it can be as soon after your evaluation. If it happens, let's say very quickly after your evaluation, then sure, you can do it. But I would always recommend that you then follow up with an email after it. So you actually have it documented when you told them. And so, but that doesn't go into a personnel file. It is just note it that way. Hey, thanks for the conversation on this date. Here's what we discussed. Ask for them to respond with a confirmation that they understood what the conversation was about. Here's our verbal conversation. I told you I needed you to make sure you come in on time. Please confirm that you understood what I asked you. or if you still have questions, period. And you can do that at any point. Then you're set up, if the same issue happens, you just go right into the next step of progressive discipline, which is an actual written warning or written reprimand. So that's does that answer your question, Stephanie? So you don't have to wait to do any of it. You just, and it is timely, right? Like, don't wait months. Like, the worst thing that we can do is then wait for 9 months when their evaluation comes up and then give them a long list of things we never talked to them about. That won't fly either. That's very alarming to people. Did I answer your question, Stephanie?
Yeah, I just feel like sometimes we go into a situation and, having like an informal conversation, like, hey,
Yeah,
I noticed you've been late, and then you have that several times, but you've not documented it. And then you start
yeah.
the verbal and the written after that, and you've still had all these conversations back here.
Right. Yeah, and it can be alarming to somebody, when they start getting emails about things you've talked about, so you may want to prep in advance, like even just verbally say, hey, if there's ever a challenge or whatever, here's how I'm going to operate with you. I am going to have the conversation and I'm going to follow up with an email. So we're always on the same page. You will have an opportunity to respond and tell me, why it's happening or whatever. So you might want to just in advance prep by talking about the style that you have as a supervisor. Like, this is my style. I'll talk to you, but not ad nauseum about about a issue. If it keeps continuing, or if it continues, I'm going to have to take the next step. Okay, so let's just kind of jump in. And if there are questions in there in the chat or anything, someone make sure you stop me. But I'm going to share this document. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I am going to walk through the progressive discipline steps. Hopefully everybody can see it. I'll make it a little bigger. If people aren't seeing it, let me know. But here's essentially the gist of progressive discipline. There are two words you're going to hear a lot about. One is progressive discipline, which is the process of walking through. So that includes a variety of steps. I mentioned a verbal warning, and you need to make it clear what it is. You might have heard there's many methods, the sandwich method, like, hey, you're really doing great. However, you could do this better. And I really like you. That's the sandwich, where you bury the piece of feedback you want them to get in between two other things. And it's really milk toasty and they don't get it, right? They just don't get the message. So be clear if you are giving people information as a verbal warning. Say it is a verbal warning, right? And it sounds kind of severe. You can also be like, hey, I'm worried about your performance. I am worried about your attendance. I would like to talk to you about that, right? And so you, and so you're the best person to decide, how can I deliver this message clearly? If you cannot, because this is really hard for me, get someone with you like HR to give the message. The worst thing you can do is to then have the meeting, say the message, and do it so poorly because it's so unclear that the person walks away and they still don't have an idea of what the message is. So verbal is the first. The second, which can come, is something written. So it can be a written warning. It can be a written reprimand. It often depends on what the circumstance is and how strongly, let's say, you and maybe your supervisor feel about whatever the thing is. If it's a relatively mild thing, like, for example, work attendance, that might be a written warning after you've given a verbal warning. If it is something like ongoing quality of data, like it's persistently poor data that's causing something down the pipeline, like people are making bad decisions, that might be a written reprimand, right? So the severity of the written thing depends on what the thing is. And here is where you really do want to get HR involved. You will not ever give a written warning or a written reprimand without checking with HR. The reason for that is there's very specific language in all of our employee handbooks and collective bargaining agreements that outline the process steps, which is this progressive discipline that you can go through. If we do not follow that, and let's say we miss a step, we don't do it right, and then later the person doesn't improve, we have to go back to that step and do it again. We cannot, and the goal here, I mean, we're talking about this as kind of a dire topic, but we're not trying to get rid of people. We want to actually try to help people improve. So that's where these verbal warnings, written warnings in the form of a written warning or a reprimand, help the person improve. You need to also tell them, what does it look like to improve? Okay, so that would be the second step.
Laura,
Question?
can I ask a question really quick?
Yeah.
With if we do something verbally, but then follow it up with an email to get it acknowledged in writing, do we need to put that in a personnel file, or do we just keep that with us for the time being?
Yeah, so you keep it with you if it is considered a verbal warning, right? So if
Okay.
it's like, and verbal warning is generally the first time. If it is the same issue, but you keep verbally doing it, after the
Then just
second
becoming
time,
a
you should
written warning.
stop doing it that
Yeah.
way and move to the written, right?
Okay.
And that's just a guideline. I mean, if you're like, the question is, how long do you want to deal with it? Because it's not going to get better if you keep giving reminders and they're just not
Right.
responding. But yes, that
Right.
so anything you do as a follow-up via email to a verbal warning, does not go in the personnel file. It is something you can keep, and
Yeah.
you just keep it for documentation purposes. That's it.
That was going to
Okay.
be my question. That's just the document to prove to you I did it.
Yes, because it could, some things last for quite a while. Like they might improve for a while, and then the next year they're with the same, let's say I'm just use attendance, the same issue, and it's like they still need to, even months later, come to work on time. You don't have to always remind them to come to work on time. So that's step 2. Now, another form of written reprimand, not just a written warning, is what's called a plan of assistance. That is when we may have already done, and you can, depending on, again, on the situation, you would have already given a verbal warning. You may have given a written warning, but a plan of assistance is a special type of written reprimand, and it is very specifically called a plan of assistance. And what that is, it's a multi-page document, and it will outline the dates you talked to the person, what the conversations were, what the overall issues are that need to be improved. And then it says, you must do it's very directive. You must do these things by this date in order to demonstrate improvement, or you run the risk of having further discipline up to and including termination. And HR will help you with that. You can't move generally from nothing. I've never given a verbal warning to a plan of assistance unless it's something really egregious. But even with that can be tricky. You can go from a verbal warning to a plan of assistance because it is a kind of written reprimand. Are there questions about that? I know some of you have worked with me on plans of assistance. I want to, for those of you that supervise classified people, there is a special section in the contract, the classified contract, that says if you give an unsatisfactory evaluation to a classified employee, they are immediately put on a plan of assistance. They immediately, like, that's the result. Further, that employee for that upcoming year, starting July 1, is not eligible for the annual increase that they would get until and unless they satisfactorily complete their plan of assistance, and then it can be retroactive back to July 1. So that's another reason, again, you want to let HR know so we can get the language right, because it's pretty alarming. And this would be, again, where you don't want to surprise the employee by the first time they hear they're unsatisfactory, they get it in evaluation, because HR will be like, no, you can't do that now, because you need to have been meeting with them and making sure you prep things. Unless something happened, let's say the day before. Even if something happened the day before, we'd probably delay the evaluation to resolve that thing. Okay, and then you could reference it in the evaluation. All right, so let's, I want to go through the steps. Okay, I mentioned them, but I didn't scroll. So we talked about verbal warnings, written warnings. Written warnings can also be called written reprimands. Now, in all of our contracts and handbooks, the word discipline is used in a very specific way. So there are different actions we can take that are considered disciplinary. Some of them are written reprimands, some of them plans of assistance, some of them are putting people on paid leave or unpaid leave. So that's again where you don't have to know all this stuff. You just need to know, I need to call somebody in HR and they will guide me. We also are not experts in all things. We are required to notify what their name is PACE. It is our legal risk insurer. They're lawyers. And we are required to notify PACE anytime an employee is anywhere in the pipeline of discipline. And that means anything after a verbal warning, anything that we've put in writing. Okay, so the verbal warnings you don't need to let us know about. As soon as you start putting stuff in writing, and I mean by the employee would sign it and it would go into their personnel file, you need to get HR involved because we need to let PACE know so that if something goes sideways legally, we are covered if we are sued by that employee. Okay, so that's really, really important. The other thing about notification of disciplinary action, when you're having a verbal warning discussion, the very first time, you do not need to notify the employee that they can bring if they're covered by a union, and most of this would be classified for most of you, you do not need to notify the employee to bring a representative of their association or their union. You don't have to. If you're just like, I'm going to give you a gentle verbal warning, but if you feel like it's going to be pretty serious, even though if it's verbal, like you're like, you must, or else you're going to get, or else you better give them notice or contact HR, because you're going to have conversations all the time in your check-ins with your employees that says, hey, you could do better here. You could do this. That is not where you need to have the employee aware that it could be disciplinary. But what it's called Weingarten rights, union represented employees are allowed to have a representative anytime they believe they are going to be disciplined for something. So the minute you think, hey, we're going to do a written, you better, and again, that's where you should reach out to HR. We have language we can provide you, but they are allowed to have a rep. So if you wanted to have a written meeting or a meeting to deliver some written stuff, don't like notify the employee in the morning that by 3 p.m. in the afternoon, you're going to have this meeting and you're going to hand them something. That puts the college at risk. Give 24 hours at least between, so the person can find a rep, make sure that you've notified HR, and we can help make sure everything's kind of aligned for you to have that conversation and deliver anything written. Okay. All right. We talked about written reprimands and plans of assistance. We often will put things into plans of assistance that should be related. Things should be related to the deficiencies or the issues that people are having, and it needs to be achievable. So what it would say is often there's something like you need to meet with your supervisor every week and come with a written plan of how you're improving. That is on them to bring that written document. It could be let's just say there's your attendance. You are required to be here on time every day. That's really clear, but it has to be something that's not nebulous. Like you can't put stuff like, you need to be nicer. How do you measure that? If it were, let's say, something like customer service, because customer service is an important element. Let's say somebody just doesn't do well. They're mean, they're crabby, whatever. It's causing problems. And that's when you have to improve your customer service. Here's the way you would state it in a plan of assistance. You must improve your customer service as evidenced by, and then give some metric. No complaints from customers, right? That would be a good, as evidenced by. I wouldn't necessarily do a survey. That's too hard to do. But you want to put stuff in there that actually is in the control of the employee to do. It can't be stuff that is just judged by you without their ability to have control over making an improvement. All right. I want to pause and see if there's questions. I want to make sure we leave time for just other kinds of questions about situations and give some examples. All right. All right, so let's just play this out. So we have verbal, we've had written something. Usually there is a plan of assistance before we get to the point of considering termination, unless it's a pretty serious violation. Someone has stolen something from the college. I'm not going to put them on a plan of assistance to say, please don't steal. No, that's not going to happen. Okay. So, but if it's something that's a performance problem, generally they'll end up on a plan of assistance. The next step, and this is where you absolutely have to get HR to help you with all parts of this, is what's called pre-termination. So we would be working with you. Let's say they've gone through their plan, or they're working on their plan of assistance. They're not improving or showing new problems of some kind. Then we would work with you to do something called a pre-termination notice. We make sure we follow all of the guidelines that are in any of our policies, procedures, laws, bargaining agreements. And what this does is it says, for example, we'll say, similar to the plan of assistance, you've been notified on X date, X date, X date of these things. You're put on a plan of assistance. This is what you was expected to do. You have not fulfilled that plan in these ways. As such, the college has decided that we are going to terminate you from your employment for these reasons. You work with HR and you have a meeting with the employee. So this is where you give enough notice. This would be definitely a time where you say, you tell them exactly what the meeting is. No surprise meetings, like send them an invite and say, hey, we're going to have a chat. And then you surprise them with a pre-termination notice. You just put it in the invite. And we even give you language that says, this is how it's going to look pre-termination. This is a pre-termination meeting. Depending on what the situation is, we might even give the letter in advance so they have time to review it, so they know what they're walking into. We say, you are welcome to bring a union representative if they're union represented to the meeting, but you give enough time. So that you want to at least give 24 hours to 48 hours notice before this meeting. HR does sit in with you. We need to get everything to our legal in advance, the letter, everything, so that they can review it. And then sometimes we have notifications to our bargaining unit presidents. So we are required by some of our language to notify them when there's a disciplinary issue with one of their members. So we need time to contact them. So with all that said, you have the meeting, and the intent, it's all written out, is we're telling you we're going to terminate you for these things. You have to provide them then after that meeting at least 24 to 48 hours. So that's what this is all talking about, to respond. It always needs to be in writing. We will not accept anything verbally. You can say, you are welcome to ask for a meeting and we'll meet together, and you provide any mitigating information you want us to consider before we make a final determination about your employment. You say, you are welcome to provide that in writing. We can meet again to do that, or you can just email it to us, and you ask them what you want to do. Because sometimes they don't want to meet again. You don't have to have a meeting just to have a meeting. If they do want to meet again, they are welcome to have their rep there again. They have to provide, if they just come in with verbal, we don't accept it. We say you have to write it. So they provide us any mitigating information that's related to our notification that says you're not doing well. We need to take at least 24 to 48 hours to actually consider what they've written. And then we make our final determination about whether we will terminate their employment, give them another opportunity, whether it's through a plan of assistance. We might even consider, is there another job that they might be better at? Maybe there's a great employee, they're just not good at this particular job. And so we then, at that last meeting, which is this last piece, the termination procedure part, we don't have to meet again. We just send them a notification and say, here's our decision. And I will tell you, most of the time when it gets to this stage, I can't even think of one time we've had mitigating information that has allowed an employee to stay longer. Because usually we've got it pretty buttoned up at this point. But we're supposed to make sure we actually consider, which we do, their information, and we just then notify them. And again, this is where it goes to our legal, all of this stuff. And then at that point, we terminate their employment. We work with the supervisor to get what's called a notice of separation. Many of you already know what that is. Payroll does their thing in terms of getting a last check cut. And then we make sure that benefits is notified because they will be eligible for COBRA. All right, so there's kind of the process in a nutshell. I want to, again, pause. I'm going to stop the share, and I want to see what I see a question here. So If an employee asks you to be a professional reference for a job outside the college, are we allowed to discuss any disciplinary actions they have received? Very good question. So you will want to, if an employee has been terminated, if they have left on their own, resigned without disciplinary action, you are allowed to give a reference. I would be cautious about how much, you say. If, for example, as it relates to, if let's say whoever calls you was like, were they, did they come to work on time? I'm always using that example, and you don't have to lie. You just say, no, they didn't, right? But I would not go into a lot of detail. One of the common questions is, would you work with them again or would you rehire them? If you would not, you should just say, no, I would not. And if they say, well, why? Say, it just was not, it didn't work out. You can ask the employee, you can call HR. I would not give a lot of information because you put the college out there and yourself. If you, let's just say somebody's a final candidate for a position and whatever you say torpedoes that for them, they may go to a lawyer, right? So I would just be very cautious. You can always refer whoever it is. If you like, I really don't want to give a reference for somebody who wasn't that great, just refer them to HR. I would recommend you don't lie. Do not lie. Don't say, oh, they were great when they weren't. Just say what you, that wasn't their strength, But if you're uncomfortable at all, I would recommend you just refer them to HR. Yasko, is that sufficient?
Yes, thank you.
Let me mention one other thing. If we are working with you and we actually terminate the employee, my first example was the employee left on their own. Maybe they just weren't doing well, but they chose to leave. If an employee was terminated, you should not at all give a reference for them. You should refer them always to HR because you may not know that, behind the scenes, let's say, a person might be fighting the termination and you don't want to get in the middle of it. So if we've worked together to terminate the employee, you should just refer them always to HR. And sometimes with terminated employees, one of the things we'll do is agree to write a neutral reference letter for them, and that's all they get. Here's the job they performed. Here's the job they were hired to do. We never lie. We won't say they do it well. We'll just say, this is what they were responsible for, period. And people sometimes want that evaluation. It's sorry, we can't give that. All right, good question. Question from somebody?
Laura, can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
It's me, Wendy. 2 questions. Number 1, does the college have a policy that if an employee is, on a work plan or that they, while they're on any kind of work plan of assistance, are they allowed to apply and look for an opportunity at the college in a different department?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
They're allowed to look.
Okay.
And they're allowed to apply.
Okay.
I will be honest that at times, if we know there's a very serious situation and we see them in a pool, we will work either with the SLT member or, we don't want to destroy anybody's chances because they could very well be better at a different job. But
Right.
Again, it would be more along the egregious side, not so much not that attendance isn't egregious, but like I said, if it was something like they were lying or they were really bad at data or they tried to hide something, we would probably step in and be like, not certain this is a good idea. But we don't actually have a policy that says they can't. We do have some stuff in the classified bargaining agreement that indicates that and this is true for all of, and Shawnee, correct me if I say it wrong, a hiring manager, and I highly recommend this, a hiring manager, not the committee, just the hiring manager, can come and look down in HR at the employee's file. They have every right to do that. If your own employees, that you supervise, or if there's an applicant in your pool that is a current employee, you may come to HR and look at that file. You have every right to do so, and I would recommend doing that.
Okay. And then my second part of the question is, if an employee would like you to write, maybe they're somewhere in this process, and they would like you to write a letter of recommendation, would it be appropriate to focus on a few things that do go well and exclude the parts that aren't going well. So you can still maybe be of assistance to them if they're looking elsewhere, but not lie. Or is it
Right.
better to just, no, thank you, I won't, no.
Yeah. So, I don't know any other way to, I mean, there's so many hard and awkward things that sometimes employees, ask of us. And you're like, I'm not prepared. I don't know what to say in the moment. And so I would craft, if you, I would craft a set of canned responses that are like, let me think about it, or let me check with HR, that kind of give you a second. So you don't have to respond in the moment. But if you have the fortitude to do it and you just know you don't want to write a letter, you should say, or have HR say, hey, we'll do it this way. We'll write a neutral reference of letter. Your supervisor let us know we'd be willing to write a neutral reference letter. But it is hard, in the moment when someone asks you, like, you want to help them. There are probably some good things that they did, maybe many, but then you're like, I don't want to, sometimes we hear like, I don't want to pass this person off knowing they have all these things, right? And so I think it's a fine line. So you should check yourself on your comfort level. If you're feeling like you're going to have to lie, I would say just either say politely, I can't, or I'll refer you to HR. But if you feel comfortable, then yes. I mean, that's the really long answer, but yes, you can write something. And I would let them know, I am going to focus on the things I think you did well. Like, you do great with customer service. You are a good colleague, right? And I would only focus on that. And then if you happen to get a call back by somebody, again, they might be like, hey, I saw you did this reference letter. Can you tell me how they do in these areas? I would again say, well, I identified the things they were really good at, or refer them to HR, because the awkwardness may not end, is all I'm saying. But yes, you're allowed to do that. Just again, just state what you think they actually did do well. I would not state anything, like, let's just say they were a data analyst. I'm just going to make up a title, but a data analyst, and they didn't do well, then you might be like, they really didn't do that well in the job, but they were a great colleague. They were great for our organization, but only focus on those things. So thank you, Wendy. What are some of the things that are a struggle for you? That's what I wonder about, because here's what I see. I don't even know. I don't have a number. I could go chat GPT it, I imagine. Conflict is not everybody's gig, right? And this is conflict. It doesn't go very far before conflict happens, because people don't, it is rare that when you say, hey, you could be better in this, some people are like, yeah, you're right. But when you get into some serious stuff, like multiple things are not doing well, they're like, no, I'm not. And then you're in this like, who's right? So what are some of the things that you're struggling with as a supervisor? I mean, are you all perfect at, not perfect. Are you readily doing these things and talking to your folks? None of us are perfect, but like, is it really hard for you?
I think previously I had a situation that was challenging. Like, there were some issues around attitude and like, okay, well, how do we like approach that? Because that's a really hard thing to define. And
Yeah.
so your team was super helpful in like, how do we make that a little more tangible? But some of those issues that have come up before, like, how do we approach that? That can be challenging when it's not like a set, like,
Yeah.
customer complaints kind of a thing.
Right.
I was going to agree with Lindsay, but she jumped in first. And that's just, how do you address in the intangible, the attitude that, it brings down the whole work team, and just, and sometimes that's just, I'm just angry kitty, and that's who I am.
Yeah.
So how do you, they're a good worker, they're getting their job done, but the whole attitude or personality conflicts, because not
Yeah.
everybody in the workplace is going to get along.
Right. Yeah, and they are tricky. Those are really hard. And especially like some of you might have moved into you might have been somewhere else at the college or new in your position at the college, and there's personnel issues that have been there and unaddressed, right? That's even harder because sometimes these people have been around for a really long time. One of the things that I didn't mention before, but I do want to mention is looking at the job description is incredibly important with some of these intangibles, right? Like most of the jobs, and as you're doing reviews for people, if stuff is missing out of job descriptions, do it during the evaluation period, right? Update things so that there's language in there that talks about some of the principles that underlie, so these intangibles that underlie this, not just the, like, you must, get data accurate, but you need to provide good customer service. You need to work collaboratively with your coworkers, right? You need to be able to positively influence, the college or the students, stuff like that, because that's when we are actually start thinking about a written reprimand or even a verbal, even if you're stepping way back and doing that, or a plan of assistance. We draw the language straight from the job description, which they signed, saying, I understood the knowledge, skills, and abilities. It's not just the duties, it's the knowledge, skills, and abilities. It's the purpose of the position. It is the job duties in and of themselves. You draw from that and you say, it was clearly stated you must provide good customer service. You must collaboratively work. Here are instances where you are not doing that. And that is really a very useful way to start those conversations. And then if they continue, we use the job description. And that, it's very difficult if they're like, well, no one ever told me I was supposed to be collaborative. It's like, well, yeah, we did. Here it is. So I would make sure you look at your job descriptions. It's a little challenging. We do have some broader policies today. One of them, and Rachel, if she wants to talk about it a little, she can. The workplace fairness policy has really expanded our ability to take action on people who are just not nice, right? Just not nice, or not, it says everybody essentially has the right to a healthy and productive work environment. And I know it says it a little differently than that, but it's essentially that concept. And then it goes on and it talks about discrimination, sexual harassment, but there is a component of it that says everybody's allowed to have a good work environment. So that's one that we've been able to use a little bit more. Rachel, is there anything you want to say about that one that might help people understand what's in there?
Yeah, well, I would say yes, definitely. If you don't know, it's the very first HR policy in the GPM. If you're not familiar with it, take a look at it. Also, G32-1, employment policy. This is one that I like, especially when you're talking about attitude, just because employment at COCC is a privilege extended after careful consideration only to those individuals possessing high personal and professional qualifications. So attitude you can often address by like, this is actually not professional. So the way that you're behaving is unprofessional. And we actually state that in a policy. Lean heavily too on our principles of community. So places where somebody is maybe behaving in a way that's not welcoming to their coworkers, or bullying in some manner, and bullying is sometimes difficult to define, but lean heavily on the principles of community and the fact that we do have a value of supporting colleagues. So if someone is, angry kitty and doesn't want to support their colleagues, then you can address that in that way. In terms of the workplace fairness, I think there's also a lot to consider there, just in terms of like, if you let something go too long. So, Laura's comment about if something is a surprise, but for you as a supervisor, it's been building up. Oftentimes, you'll suddenly explode on someone, and it can look like retaliation. Like maybe they were just sick one day, but there's this other thing going on in the background for you, and you sort of explode on them, and it can feel like you're retaliating against them for taking a valid sick day. So just beware of that, and make sure that you don't let things go on too long.
That's great. Thank you. What other things so Rachel mentioned one, we talked about waiting much too long until it bubbles up, right? Or it gets, too far along, or especially if there's interpersonal conflict with employees, or you have interpersonal conflict, or they, with someone you supervise, because it's really, really hard, to do that. We do have resources in HR to help facilitate those conversations. I want to mention a little bit about student employees or any variety of temporary employee, right? Irregular wage, a student employee, a contract, or not a contract person, but someone in CBI PD or in Stephanie Getch's area, the community ed stuff, or we have what's called community assistance, that anyone who gets money, right? You do not have the authority to just fire them. You don't. Okay, you cannot just say, hey, you're fired and get out. There is a shorter pathway for our hourly temporary workers because they're not covered by, and I'm not suggesting we just willy-nilly do stuff, but this is also true of our part-time faculty. They're not covered by a bargaining unit, but we still have to do, so we do, you might do a shorter version of progressive discipline. The ultimate thing, and all of us are hearing about this in a different context politically right now, but due process, right? So what we want to establish is that that's the big umbrella of progressive discipline is all the steps we're taking. What it then helps us with is set a foundation for due process. We were not whimsical about what we did, right? We took all these steps. And that's the practice that we've been trying to develop over the last number of years, is to be like, if anyone were to ever ask us, have you ever done this before to any employee? Yes, we have. And here's how we've done it, right? Because that's going to hold up in court if we ever have to. So people can't say, oh, you just decided to terminate me one day. It's like, no, we didn't. But when it comes to hourly workers, the path is much shorter. You might give a verbal warning. You may or may not give a written warning, but you will still give them due process in terms of saying, we're going to terminate you for this thing that I've reminded you 10 times about, and you aren't correcting, and we just give them notice, right? We often will not do a pre-termination meeting. So we would just say, we're letting you go. You have until tomorrow to let us know of anything, but it's a much shorter thing. And we don't want to be just willy-nilly about it, but we have a lot more flexibility in that regard. But it is still fair to let people know in advance if they have a shortcoming and give them the opportunity to correct. Again, there are egregious things that's not the case, but you will still get HR involved. I would recommend, if you have student workers, temporary workers, whatever you call them in your area, you have a internal process that says, so that they're aware, you have 2 warnings and then you can be terminated. It doesn't have to be like a widely dispersed COCC policy. It's just internally, like, we'll give you 2 warnings for being late in attendance, and then we'll work with HR and you will be terminated, right? Don't, like, if you have them sign anything as a hourly worker, make sure it's clear what it looks like to be disciplined. And you should, again, work with HR on that.
What about the T2s, Laura, that I work with that are instructors, basically? Is it okay for me to just opt not to recontract with them?
Yes, that's totally fine. And so, and another way of doing that too is we also have, this is true, and of part-time faculty, it's also true of our irregular wage. Like, they have a period of time, like generally if you're doing an irregular wage person, whatever, you might have July 1 through June 30 of a particular year. You might, you do those approval to hire forms. If June 30 comes and you're like, I don't need them anymore, you don't do a new piece of paper. But it's fair to let them know, we don't need you anymore. In that, if you've somehow written up some documentation that indicates they will be here for July 1 through June 30 of next year, and then all of a sudden you don't want them, you should let them know that. But when that contract period actually ends, then no, you don't need to bring them back. And I know, Stephanie, yours is different because you might use them here and there and whatever. But if something were to happen and you don't need them, don't want them, once that period is done, you can be done. If something were to happen during the contract period, we would work with you to have like an off-ramp that would help. What other things that would be helpful to kind of shore up your confidence that you can address these things, or your worries?
I have difficulty. I don't want to suck up everybody's time, but I'm a frequent flyer to Shauna's office looking for words of wisdom. I have a difficult time, not like me personally as a supervisor, but having these conversations with administrators for a number of reasons. One is because there's an inherent assumption that work schedules are more fluid. And in my area, they do need to be a little bit more fluid, but we still need to be cognizant of that. But also there's just an inherent being treated like a colleague and a peer versus a supervisor subordinate kind of relationship, and wanting to maintain that professionalism, but still have to have this conversation. So I just find it, I mean, I feel like classified staff, it's pretty much really in a box because of the CBA, but we don't have that with fellow administrators. Any words of wisdom?
I'm going to ask Sean before, because I know I've been sucking up the airwaves here, but Shauna and Rachel, do you have any thoughts for Stephanie?
I'm thinking, yeah, because I have
The
to.
fast answer looks like no.
No, I think it stems a lot from the type of relationship you build with the person and set with the person. And what I mean by that is you could be colleagues and friends with someone, but there's still that separation of I am your supervisor, and these are the expectations I have of you. And if you're having consistent one-on-ones with someone and setting those expectations and talking about those, and if they're going awry a little bit, to kind of address them in those regular one-on-ones, that's what comes to mind. But I totally understand, Stephanie, it is a little different with administrators because our times are a little different and more fluid and that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, it's establishing that not boss relationship, but there is a boundary there.
Rachel,
yeah, I'd tag on to what Shauna said. One, if you don't have regular one-on-ones with your folks, make sure that you start scheduling them today. And if it's just a 10-minute check-in with an irregular wage or a temporary person, they can give you a lot of really good information. And the difference between not having regular check-ins and having regular check-ins is huge, because especially for new employees, they don't know what's urgent and what's not urgent. They don't know what they can hold on to, and it's tough for them to track growth and understanding if every conversation is a doorway or a hallway conversation rather than, a formal one-on-one. So having a place for them to park some items for the next meeting is really helpful, so everything doesn't feel really urgent. In terms of Stephanie's question, though, I really feel like, and Stephanie, I'm going to go back to community learning back in the day. We had flexible schedules, but we were still accountable to one another. So, if you weren't in the office in the middle of the day, or I wasn't in the office until, later afternoon, there was a reason why. And we were sharing that really clearly. So we had some accountability to one another. Like, I've got a class in the next 3 nights. So my schedule is going to be shifted a little bit, and not making it onerous, but just making sure we were communicating in some way with each other so that we knew where we were and we were accountable.
One thing, go ahead, Stephanie.
I just say and it's not just like our schedule and community ed, our non-classified schedules do require those nights and those weekends, but we also need to be accountable to our desks. So it means I have to say, there's times you have to work over 40 hours a week, and that's just the way it is. And I just don't know how to say that. I mean, I know how to say it. I just don't know how to make them hear it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just said it pretty great, Stephanie. I was just going to say, you just said it pretty great, Stephanie. And then I think the hard part, and I think I know you, that then it's, if that's not being met, then it's these conversations I think that Laura just outlined, just really direct of, hey, we got to sit down at our check-in and we got to talk about, last week was a week where honestly we needed 50, and 2 weeks from now is a week where we need 30. And that's how we balance. And I need you to do that. And I'm going to follow up with you with an email to start to say, hey, we're going to agree to this, and talk to me if it's unclear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Laura.
And some of the things I would encourage you again to go look at job descriptions. If it is not like in the ergonomics section that they're expected to work like an administrator, expected to work after hours, or even though there's I think somewhere in maybe the administrator handbook where it says an administrator is generally expected to work 40 to 45 hours, at least 40 hours, but 45 could be, or something. There's some language I think in there, but make sure your job description is there, and then again lean on that. And if it's not, go back and add it, and then and make sure you have that conversation. I think there's again, this is where I don't want to say, oh, do it like I do, because I have a different personality. Like, I'm really direct, and that doesn't work for everybody. But maybe one of the things that I often will help people with is a script. Get a script. Don't do it off script. Like, don't go into these meetings where you're really wanting to share something or change something or get them to listen and be like, oh, well, I think I have it all in my head. Write it down so you say everything you want to say. And then that would be, again, not a verbal warning, but then follow up and say, here's, there are some important things that like, here's how I see our relationship, like introduce some empathy there and even some vulnerability on your part and be like, hey, here's some things that maybe I didn't emphasize well enough. Or haven't, because you do some good things, but there are some things that I need you to improve on, and here they are. And don't do the sandwich thing, but just do here's what are the things I'm asking you. Or if it's your schedule, like, as an administrator, this is what it looks like to be an administrator. You are an administrator. This is how I see it. How do you see it? So have that two-way conversation, but script it. And then at the end, you're like, are we on the same page? They might need a moment. They might be upset. Let's get back together. You share your side. So it might be a couple of conversations to get to the place where you want to be. But I would say when there's something that maybe has been very difficult for both of you or has been an ongoing issue, and maybe it's not something that warrants any kind of discipline at all, script it out. Practice it with somebody in advance, so that and you're welcome to come and ask HR for help. If you're really worried, have somebody else, and it doesn't have to be HR, but have somebody else sit in with you, because when things start to go sideways, I would highly recommend you do not have one-on-ones with people when things start getting maybe a little more heated. And here's what I will tell you, as direct as I am, I struggle with these things sometimes too, like with strong personalities. And you're like, I've said it 100 times. And and so the question is like, are you going to force me to tell you who I am positionally in this organization and who you are, right? Like, I am this and you are that. And yes, some people will force you to do that. Like, I am going to pull I'm your supervisor card, and I am going to tell you exactly the place you sit in, and that's going to be very uncomfortable. But I often am like, I've asked you and I've asked you, I've told you what I'd like, you've had an opportunity, and then at some point, if they're still not doing it, that's when you have to pull out the very directive, I'm your supervisor card, and I wish I didn't have to do this, but I'm going to, because we need to all, march in the same direction. But that's the way I could do it, because I will run you over. That's just, when I get to that point, I will run you over. That isn't going to work for everybody. So sometimes scripting it out with your own style is really important.
I have a tendency to be really direct too. And so that's where I'm like, do I not speak English? What are you not understanding? And I think that's where DISC kind of helps, Rachel, where I can go back to that DISC profile and say, who am I dealing with? How am I going to communicate to get them to understand what I'm trying to say?
Right.
Yeah, 100%. And I wanted to just add one little piece in here. I know we've got folks in the room who have had really complicated, maybe they're discipline issues or just performance issues, but you also have layers of leave. You might also have an ADA accommodation, and there are so many factors to be paying attention to for these. So that's why we really need to walk alongside you for this, to make sure that you are separating out discipline from a protected leave, or a protected leave from an ADA accommodation. And how do you manage all of those things? Well, you let us help you, and we just take one thing at a time. And we work through all the pieces and make sure that we are both compliant and compassionate.
Well, thank you for letting me suck up the air in the room. I've got to run. Bye.
Just real quick, I wrote in the chat, if anybody, and maybe if anybody wants to watch it and or listen to it, not watch it. Well, I guess you can watch it. It's on YouTube, but listen to it or whatever. There's this person, Jefferson Fisher. He happens to be a lawyer. Recently I came across this, it's 3 communication truths that will change every conversation. And it has some really good tips on small words you can say to, especially with people that are maybe a stronger personality than you, you might listen to it if you want, or I think there's probably some way you can read the transcript if that's your thing. But it helped me, and but I would just say nobody is immune. Nobody's immune from these things. And there are days where none of us want to address these things. If you're not feeling up to it that day, then take a break for yourself, wait on it. But then kind of craft out what you need, want to do. Ask people others for support. You've got a ton of great supervisors at the college. Ask HR if you want some help. But I would just say, please don't put off these conversations. Don't put them off. They don't go away. People don't it sounds so negative today. People don't radically rewire. If there are people that they want to, if oh, hey, they kind of have a change personality, then you can help them develop. It is really rare for people to go, oh, you're right about all these things. I do have all these problems and I will fix it. It takes a lot of effort, right? It takes a lot of effort to get people to adjust. And usually those folks that are really great are the ones you don't even have to verbal reprimand. You just do check-ins. And that is one of the things Shauna, I think in finds, and she does our exit interview, or well, Shauna and I think Rachel are doing our exit interviews. One of the most common responses, there's a question: do you have regular check-ins with your supervisors? I can't tell you how often it's no, but it is a lot. It is a lot that people, and you've probably heard this, people do not leave pay. They do not leave organizations. They leave supervisors. They leave us because we don't set the proper expectation. We don't hold them accountable, right? There's a lot more that they want from us, right? They want all the love and tenderness and empathy we can give, and we probably don't get much of it back from them, right? There's a lot of good people, but it's a lot of work to be a supervisor. And so you've got to examine how that relationship looks. And if it's a rough relationship, you can still have one. Like I said, I have some of those that I'm like, ugh, I don't know how. I've tried every strategy in my toolbox and I can't get them to respond. And then you have to be like, what do I do next? So there's not always a perfect answer. Sometimes you have to try a lot of things. So I hope this was helpful. Anybody have any, do you have any tools? I know we only have a minute, but anything that you're like, this really works for me. Maybe you could either follow up with Rachel by email or feel free to chime in.
Thank you so much, Laura. And I don't want to cut anybody off, but the recording will be posted on our training page on the intranet, along with this document, and I will put a link to the podcast too. So
yeah, check it out. If someone does see it, send me a note, or listen to it, send me a note if you liked it. There were some key words in there that were super helpful for my conversations.
awesome.
All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Appreciate you
Thanks,
taking the
y'all.
time. So good to see you. Bye-bye.
Can't find the button. There it is.